Yeah.
Well, with regards to, I guess, marriage and sort of the monogamy that has always been associated with that idea, I'm really curious what you feel we should be talking about as a culture. I mean, thankfully, and I kind of can't believe that I actually have to say this, but the rights to marry between races and then within genders that were
Hmm.
laid out in Loving versus Virginia and Hodges v. Obergefell, those seem to be safely codified into law mostly. Yeah, I feel like we're hanging by a thread on a lot of rights that we thought we could take for granted 5 years ago. But that being said, those things being locked in, for a lot of people, that's where the fight for marriage equality ends. How does that sit with you?
Well, when you told me that this was going to be the topic for the show, uh, I I turned to my boyfriend and said, "Okay, so how do I, over the course of 2 hours, pat out enough of my opinion here beyond just saying, you know, anybody should be able to marry anybody they want, because
Mm-hmm.
that's that's my default baseline opinion about marriage equality. How do I expand on that? Well, I think again we're dealing with a number of very conservative people, mostly pushing the Judeo-Christian agenda. That's a big part of it, and their baseline is that thing they like to chant: marriage should be between one man and one woman.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Sometimes they'll
when
throw in for life.
yes,
Sometimes.
sometimes, yes. And of course, then you have to deal with the fact that a huge number of the people chanting that have divorces in their past. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yep.
hypocrisy is
Mm.
a thing.
Just look at the
But
King of England.
yeah, for example. Um, but then we have when they say one man, one woman, I think a lot of us were sleeping on the fact we were paying attention to the genders being mentioned there.
Right.
And marriage equality was seen as about allowing same sex marriages. But we were ignoring, completely sleeping on the number one man, one woman. It's part of the agenda is you can't have more than two people in the equation in their agenda. Um, and again, I think it just goes to there's this feeling of anything different than what they signed up for or what they had shoved on them and didn't actually ever sign up for consciously is threatening. It's scary. They don't like it because it's different and it wasn't something that they were allowed to do. So we get into that part of it, and I think we're just since we've gotten somewhat past which genders are allowed to marry, now we're starting to look at the number that they're the one in their chant. So
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of poly folks hear that same sort of like, well, whatever you want to do in your own bedroom is fine, but why should I have to hear about it? Rhetoric that's aimed at queer folks. I mean, that
mhm.
sounds not entirely different from what you were sort of saying about your sister, at least in
Yeah,
years past. Do you think that that's a fair comparison?
I absolutely do. Do I think that poly folks have it as bad as the struggle for gay equality? No, I
Sure.
don't. Uh, but I can absolutely find for you very quickly and cite situations where it was pretty darn bad, where long established poly partners who had raised the children with the birth parents as family units don't have legal rights when it comes to healthcare decisions about their non-married partner or their kid who they raised from birth, and now but they're not the birth parent, so yeah, there are struggles with it for sure. um but yeah, it's I think again, I think a whole lot of it is just people not having the freedom to make their decisions in the first place. So
And
It
I
just
have to kind of empathize a little bit. I'm sorry if you didn't mean to cut you off, but just that notion of feeling like you have it all figured out. feeling like your culture, your parents, your, religious text or whatever else has handed you this guide that says, I mean, at least in my experience, like, hey, you're 17, you need to start looking around at who you want to spend the rest of your life with. And 21, like, you haven't locked that in forever yet. But I mean, when I did marry my high school sweetheart at that young age, there was a very real sense of feeling like I didn't have to worry about these questions anymore, feeling like it was sort of a settled issue. And that's a difficult thing to give away.
I can see that. Yeah. I mean, there are
That's
lots of ways in which I don't have securities now that I had in a monogamous legal marriage. So,
because
as a single woman, I'm not currently married. I am single. I have two partners, long term, one of 5 years, one of 4 years. I am also, I occasionally date because a third long-term partner would be welcome. I think I have the bandwidth to handle it.
Hmm.
Um, but increasingly, since many of my needs are well covered by my existing partners, I'm increasingly picky at this point. So it gets harder and harder to find good potentials. So
I just wanted to ask, do you think that, well, as this is, an atheist show, that we could end up with some very strange bedfellows in the campaign for, poly equality as well? Because, certain religious orders are very open to non-monogamous relationships. And do you think that we'll be having to, get in some very strange bedfellow type relationships to get this through?
I do. Um, Polygamy and polyamory are wildly different things as they are practiced. Simple definition: polyamory means many loves. It has nothing to do with the genders involved. And it also doesn't have anything to do with sexuality or sex. I know a whole lot of absolutely asexual polyamorous people who have more than one deeply committed romantic relationship, and there's no sex happening. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a thing. Polygamy, of course, is the word breaks down to many wives. It's got nothing to do with many husbands. That's polyandry, and there's
Yeah.
hardly any of that
And
going
it
on. That's
basically doesn't exist outside of textbooks and
right.
intellectual debates.
Exactly. So, polygamy, the problem with polygamy is the way that it's practiced regarding consent and age, because the majority of the folks practicing polygamy are much older men with much, much, much younger women, even girls who don't
Yeah.
yet deserve the title women. And that is problematic in and of
Mhm.
itself for a completely separate reason that has nothing to do with how many people are in a relationship. You know, that's that's my bottom line with it. When I told one of my partners that we were going to have this conversation, as I said, he tried to get me into a devil's advocate thing just to like warm me up and practice, um, and his first thing, he tried the slippery slope. That was his like. He wanted to get right into slippery slope, and he cited the person. I think it's a woman who married a dolphin. It's a thing. You can look it up. It really happened. She thinks she married a dolphin.
Mhm.
What does the dolphin think? Who knows? and and he was saying, well, like he was taking devil's advocate. There's going to be disorder and chaos in the streets and dogs and cats and all of that. He went right there, and he cited the dolphin, and I went, so, and he goes, well, that's a consent violation. I said, no, it's not. First off, nobody says she's having sex with the dolphin. You want to have the conversation
Yeah,
about sex
dolphin
with the
doesn't
dolphin?
know that anything
Right.
non-consensual is there to be consented
It sounds
to.
like she just.
Like, yeah, she claims that she had been going to this beach every day and hanging out with this dolphin. It was a wild dolphin, but it was coming to her every day. So there's its consent to be in her company. It has the option to be in her company or not.
Mhm.
And they were hanging out together all day, every day, and acting like a couple. I don't know what the sexual story was between her and the dolphin. None of my business. Uh, and I would agree that that gets us into a possible consent problem.
Sure.
But that she thinks that she held a ceremony that had any meaning to the dolphin or to her, who cares? What is that hurting? Who is that hurting if
Yeah.
she thinks that she is lifelong committed to this dolphin?
No, I honestly think that that is a fair point. It does make me wonder if the dolphin might be psychically screaming, like, "How do I get out of here? Like, so long and thanks for all the fish." But I really do take your point that even in some wild world where we actually start moving towards that, which is honestly hard for me to take seriously, even as a
Mhm.
hypothetical. But what would the problem actually be? How
Right.
is that meaningfully damaging? I mean, maybe it goes back to that question that we asked in the poll that I would encourage people to weigh in on of, does it possibly devalue marriage as a concept? I've always thought of that as a personal commitment. And so
Mhm.
it means whatever you personally say that it does, regardless of what what the word is understood to mean by others. But it's important to notice that, yeah, worst possible case scenario doesn't really sound like a meaningful problem.
Right. First off, I don't think that there's going to be a huge number of people marrying their cars or chairs or their cats or whatever.
Yeah, I
And
have a hard time buying that narrative.
How
right,
do you
I don't
marry a
think it's
chair?
yes, exactly. I mean, I gotta say this desk chair is pretty sweet. It's a really nice desk chair, but I'm not gonna marry it. But I want to marry 19 people, and they all have committed to do so. They've made conscious decisions to commit to me, and I to them, and we've like it's why not? Who are we hurting if I want to marry 19 people and they all consent as full-on consenting adults? What's the problem? And of
Mhm.
course, consent is the watchword here. We're still not talking about kids or disabled people who don't have the intellectual capability of understanding the commitment and consenting to it. Um, that's the line for me.
Mhm.
Other than that, yeah. We're right back to, does Lily think that we should have, plural marriage? Yep. Long as everybody consents and has the intellectual capacity to know what they're getting into.